B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, September 26, 2018. And it appears to me that Brett Kavanaugh's nomination has been derailed by allegations put forward by a client of Michael Avenatti that Kavanaugh was present and may have participated in what they called trains during high school. And these trains, that's a term for gang rapes. These are very serious charges, and they come from a source who, at least on paper, appears to be quite credible. Her name is Julie Swetnick, and as Avenatti tipped off Rachel Maddow on Monday night, these charges are fresh. He just was contacted by this woman in recent weeks, and they have submitted what is described as a sworn statement from Julie Swetnick, a declaration that has been sent to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And she charges that Kavanaugh and his friends, including his best friend forever and sidekick, Mark Judge, well, that they caused girls to become inebriated and disoriented so that they could be gang raped in a side room or a bedroom by a train of numerous boys. Now, this is a remarkable allegation, and it is in many ways affirmed by the details that she offers. She said, "I have a firm recollection of seeing boys lined up outside rooms at many of these parties." She says at least 10 of them that she attended, waiting for their turn with a girl inside the room. And she says at one of those parties, she herself was raped. And I want to be clear that she does not name Kavanaugh as the rapist, but as somebody who was present and who may have been an observer or a witness. Now, she believes that she was drugged with Quaaludes or something similar in her drink, and she said that she has a clear recollection of this. So she also appears more credible than some of the other accusers. She has held jobs with security clearances in the Treasury Department, the IRS, the Department of Homeland Security, and she met Kavanaugh and Judge back in the 1980s at a house party in the Washington, D.C. area. So she said there were at least 10 of these that she attended. Now, you know, one of the questions that immediately comes to mind as a challenge to her credibility is that if she was in fact a witness to these trains and to women being either encouraged or tricked into drinking or being drugged, why did she keep going to those parties? But it's easy in hindsight to apply shame and guilt and reasonable, rational judgment to activities that were not conducted under those auspices. So this is a real blow to the Kavanaugh nomination and the attempt to ram through, to railroad through, if you will, the confirmation of this far-right justice who would serve for 30 to 40 years if he is confirmed. And Michael Avenatti has surfaced as kind of the anti-Trump, the guy who's got the kryptonite. He represents Stormy Daniels. He predicted Michael Cohen's fall, and that Cohen had a lot of information about Trump. And so far, while he's another one of these egotistical lawyers who loves being on television, he hasn't served up any bullshit. And so this is a serious problem. Now, it's hard to predict how this plays out because under ordinary circumstances, the Republican Party would be aghast at this, and they would find a convenient face-saving way to say Judge Kavanaugh has withdrawn his name from nomination to avoid being a distraction on the president. But we're not hearing that. The Republicans are, to borrow a term from the card game Hearts, they are shooting the moon. And shooting the moon is a risky maneuver because if you come up short, you end up with a lot of negative points and your opponents don't. If you do shoot the moon, you set your opponents back by 13 points. That's the way the card game works. Well, I believe that the Republicans are just hanging on And they believe that this is a smear campaign launched by these dangerous Democrats, and that, they can just basically ignore it, use the power of the majority to force the vote out of the committee, then hope that the Republicans stand firm and that they're able to push through the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. It comes with grave risks because they might prevail in the moment only to face the wrath of voters in November, where they could see a wave that causes Republicans to lose control of the House and the Senate. And that, of course, would set back Trump. It would enable impeachment and other efforts to rein him in, to investigate his policy shifts and the people he's populated his administration with. But the hardliners on the Republican right may just hunker down and say, in Trump style, you just hit back, you never admit weakness or error. And so this is going to be a wild ride over the next few days. So this accuser number 3, Swetnick, says, quote, I witnessed efforts by Mark Judge, Brett Kavanaugh, and others to cause girls to become inebriated and disoriented so they could then be gang raped in a side room or bedroom by a train of numerous boys. In approximately 1982, I became the victim of one of these gang or train rapes where Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh were present. Now, at minimum, Swetnick's claims, I believe, require a full investigation. At minimum, it requires the Judiciary Committee to hear testimony from Mark Judge, who, to date, is not on a witness list for tomorrow's hearing, where the only 2 witnesses we're told will present are Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, not Mark Judge. And so it's jaw-dropping to imagine that the Republicans think that they can hold this together long enough to get him on the court, and then everybody's just going to forget about it. And, of course, if the Democrats do regain power, one of the things they could do is launch impeachment proceedings against Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So the risk here is almost off the charts. And we have Brett Kavanaugh. In a moment, we will enumerate his limited hangout approach, but he claims he was a virgin at the time, and this further damages his credibility. So we also, of course, get dirt on Ms. Swetnick. We learn that she's a non-affiliated voter in Washington, D.C. She voted in the 2016 general election, and despite the fact that she had an IRS clearance last year, she was dinged by the IRS for $40,000 in outstanding taxes last October, but she paid them off. And that's what happens when you go public. The media just goes diving on the internet for any available public information. That's why Christine Blasey Ford has had to evacuate her home in Palo Alto, because she got doxxed. And that brings out low-life people who make threats and make life miserable for people who believe they're standing up to tell the truth. Then we have accuser number 2, that's Deborah Ramirez, who went to Yale and partied with Kavanaugh, and she describes some of those parties. She's the woman who said that at this one party where they were all drinking and playing a drinking game, a kind of truth or dare, I guess, somebody pulled out a dildo, and then she says Kavanaugh pulled out his junk. And in this weird exchange, she tried to push him away and ended up touching his penis. And she found that, to be a very ugly episode. And, of course, she'll be challenged for participating in a drinking game, and they'll try to say that this is neener, he said, she said. And so I believe that her charges will be hard to press and will face a lot of cross-examination. But she does paint a picture of Brett Kavanaugh as a very heavy drinker, a stumbling drunk, a guy who joined the Deke fraternity where they did even more drinking and sexist type behavior. And, of course, Kavanaugh, who attempts to wave it all away, this does chip away at his credibility. And the question is, are there Republicans who will defect on the Kavanaugh nomination? And that is the real bottom line here. What does it take? What does it take for Republicans to find a moral center, to find a point beyond which they cannot tolerate, to find a point where they feel that their own political futures are at risk? We're racing to the bottom here, and we haven't reached it yet. So the Republicans, as they had hinted, have decided to outsource the grilling of Christine Blasey Ford on Thursday at the Senate Judiciary Committee. And they have engaged the services of a Phoenix district attorney, a prosecutor named Rachel Mitchell, who has been at it for a while, and she is described as an expert on sexual assault and sexual harassment claims. She has worked there in the Phoenix County Attorney's Office for 26 years. I don't know much more about her, but she will be the gunslinger who comes in to try to destroy Christine Blasey Ford. And I was listening to Rush Limbaugh on my way to the secret studio this morning, and he continues to hammer away in his obvious sexist pig mode. He continually refers to Blasey as Ballsy, Christine Ballsy, Christine Ballsy. And he made a big deal that none of her family members have signed on to these meaningless letters that all kinds of people sign to support or oppose a position, in this case, the support for the accuser. But, Limbaugh is the kind of guy who has no sensitivity, and he believes that his followers lap up everything he says. But it's really a virus that has spread, and Trump has used these attacks on women, and he, of course, is the least credible person to defend a guy who is accused by multiple women of sexual misdeeds. So this is this comedy of errors, this bizarre, you can tell words are a struggle for me right now, because I've never really witnessed something quite this bizarre and freakish in the 40-plus years that I have been commenting on American politics. So the sex crimes prosecutor, Rachel Mitchell, will be asking the questions. Democrats say that they can handle it. They'll be asking their own questions. And that leaves those 11 Republican, all male, all white, most over 60, sitting there just listening to gossip and becoming a kind of voyeur panel. And, of course, they already have scheduled a vote at the Judiciary Committee on Friday morning. And so they don't expect anything that, occurs at their hearing tomorrow to affect the outcome of the vote. And this kind of deafness in the era of Me Too is particularly stunning. So Brett Kavanaugh has been in front of murder boards. Those are dry runs of testimony, interaction with people who pretend to be, Senator Kamala Harris or Senator Dick Durbin. And he's got some of his lines already memorized, and they've been released to the public. One of the things that he'll say at the hearing tomorrow is, in retrospect, I did and said things in high school that make me cringe now. But that's not why we're here today. What I've been accused of is far more serious than juvenile misbehavior. I never did anything remotely resembling what Dr. Ford describes. And I predict this will fail, at least with objective people. This is a limited hangout where he's saying, yeah, I drank a little bit and, I'd be embarrassed by what I did then if I look at it now. But gosh, I was just in high school. And again, the bottom line is Brett Kavanaugh credible? Are his denials? Is this limited hangout? Is his claim that he was a virgin, at least into his college years, going to be upheld? Well, the latest accuser, number 3, she says that she heard him say that on Fox News the other night, and that it's a flat-out lie. So depending on how many she's are allowed to engage in the he said, she said contest, I believe the she's will prevail. But if the geezers on the Republican team at the Judiciary Committee don't have their hearing aids turned up, then it's a bit of a stalemate. And in the last day or so, the Christine Blasey Ford legal team has released a set of documents. These are 4 affidavits from people who can define the day and time when Christine Ford told them that she had been sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh at that party back in the 1980s. And the corroborating witnesses do, I think, offer some credibility, but they all come many, many decades after the original incident. And we know that that fact will be seized upon by this hired gun from Phoenix, Rachel Mitchell, who is supposed to take down Christine Blasey Ford. So here's more of the rehearsed testimony from Kavanaugh. I drank beer with my friends, usually on weekends. Sometimes I had too many. In retrospect, I said and did things in high school that make me cringe now. And he repeats his denial. I never did anything remotely resembling what Ford has accused him of doing. And he also has this little out that allows him to claim that he's so respectful of women that I'm not questioning that Dr. Ford may have been sexually assaulted by some person in some place at some time. But I have never done that to her or to anyone. So this is going to be quite a little morality play. And you can expect the political spin machines to be operating at the highest possible RPM. And they're already at it. When you look at the commentary about the latest charges against Brett Kavanaugh, well, you have Trump saying about the vote, they could have pushed it through 2.5 weeks ago and you wouldn't be talking about it right now, which is frankly what I would have preferred. And Trump said, we should go through a process because there shouldn't be even a little doubt. But Democrats seize on the point that Merrick Garland wasn't given a process, wasn't given a hearing, wasn't allowed to confront any accusers, not that we know of any problems that he may have had like Garland, but also there was never any vote. And here's Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Well, you know the routine. They go before the committee, they have a hearing, and then the senators vote on it. So they're trying to say that this is all very normal, and they want to ignore the noise in the room, and they want to deny these women their agency. Now, the other area where the spin machine is working big time is that you may have heard that Trump gave a speech at the United Nations yesterday, and he made a claim about how he has done more in 20 months than any president in American history, and laughter broke out in the UN General Assembly. Now, the spinmeisters at the White House are trying to tell you that people were impressed by the remark that Trump made, and then when he made a crack that, something to the effect of, I didn't expect that to draw a laugh, people laughed at that. Now, if you look at the videotape, it didn't happen that way, and it just shows how desperate they are to create their own reality over there at the Trump fake news machine. Now, in addition to the laughter that he drew, Trump, I think, alienated many people in the room, including some allies of America, with this over-the-top America First statement. Quote, we will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. But what he's really describing is white nationalism and isolationism, with the right to intervene at will when the fancy strikes, say on Iran, or by supporting Israel at all costs. Also at the UN, as we mentioned, Trump, his first move on Monday was to basically strong-arm other nations into signing a global call to action on the world drug problem. And this is a new enforcement-based approach to drug control and interdiction. And it, of course, belies the obvious evidence of the failure of prohibition, the failure of criminalizing drugs and trying to control them that way. And there are some countries that declined to sign on to Trump's paper. And partly it's because of the way it originated and nobody had read it beforehand. It wasn't vetted by any particular process. It was just, boom, presented, sign this. And in his speech, Trump uses that imprecise language that is so maddening, where he talks about people and you're either our friend or you're not. And he doesn't define what it takes to be considered our friend in Trump's book. And so it leaves other nations, I guess, desperate to kiss his ass, trying to show that they can respond to a bully too. But Norway refused to sign, New Zealand didn't sign, Nigeria and Brazil, Germany wouldn't sign. And, curiously, Canada and Mexico did sign. And again, we don't really know what they signed. We don't know if it really has any meaning or importance, but we'll probably find out later. Also at the United Nations, Trump did a photo op with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and said that he hopes to present Plan Jared, that's what I call it, the long-anticipated peace plan for Israel and Palestine. And he said that he's going to do it over the next 2 to 3 to 4 months, whatever that means. Now, in March, they said the plan was imminent, about to be released. And also in the photo op with Bibi, Trump said that for the first time that he likes a two-state solution. Now, I believe that Netanyahu has been maneuvering by building more settlements, by alienating the Palestinians, by poisoning any prospect of peace deliberations or movement, that he is signaling that he wants a one-state solution and no citizenship or real rights for the non-Jews in that one state. And that, I believe, is a recipe for ongoing carnage. But it's interesting that based on this news account, Trump was not brushed back by Netanyahu when he indicated support for a two-state approach. Trump also dropped, as he presided over the United Nations Security Council today, he attacked China, accusing them of interfering in the midterm elections this November in an attempt to damage him politically because of his tough tactics on trade. He said, they don't want me or us to win because I'm the first president to ever challenge China on trade. And he didn't offer any evidence of the alleged election meddling. China responded immediately, we did not, will not interfere in any country's domestic affairs. We refuse to accept any unwarranted accusations. Now, Trump didn't say anything about Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 elections. And while China is active in cyber warfare, I don't have any other indication than Trump's little expletive here that this is based on any facts. Meanwhile, the New York Times is trying to alert us to a dangerous threat coming from Russia. The headline reads, is a new Russian meddling tactic hiding in plain sight? And I find this a comical piece. The byline is Kevin Roos. Never heard of Kevin before. But they expose a website called usareally.com. And it's run by a Russian guy named Alexander Malkovich. And it's a joke. Take a look at it. Yeah, I'm sure that the CIA will track you forever, but go ahead. Log on to usreally.com. And you'll see that it's an amateur operation attempting to cover divisive issues in the United States. And the New York Times indicts them this way. USA Really's website depicts the United States as a democracy in decline, riddled with crime and divided by partisan rancor. And we're supposed to think, oh, yeah, that's fake news. Only we are a democracy in decline. And while violent crime has declined, we have a lot of problems with guns and cops shooting people who aren't armed. And yes, we have a lot of partisan rancor which is triggered by the tweeter-in-chief every goddamn day. And so I printed this out. The Times rambles on for 11 pages here, promoting this guy's website as they make fun of it, ridicule the bad English syntax that appears, and, that therefore, I don't know. And here's a quote. A 2017 American intelligence report concluded that both RT and Sputnik were part of Russia's state-run propaganda machine. Well, that was a joke as well. That was the addendum to the January 6, 2017 assessment by the intelligence community regarding the alleged Russian meddling. And it used stale information about RT and Abby Martin's show to try to make it look like it was a major factor in the 2016 election. And the New York Times, buried in this story today about USA Really, admits that they have fewer than 10,000 visits a day. This hardly has any impact. They are giving it more attention than it otherwise ever would have garnered. And that's the kind of media malpractice that I try to expose on a daily basis here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. And I appreciate the support of listeners who send me money for subscriptions. People like Siri Walgren, the incredible Margaret Anderson from Seattle, who's been sending me generous contributions since she heard my syndicated radio show in Seattle back in 2008. Paul Karsh, Marvin Rasmussen. They all kick in about $5 a month. Some people do 10, a few people do 20. And I invite you to participate. I need your support. It validates the work that I do, and it helps me cover the costs. All you have to do is go to peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and I think you know what to do from there. I want to acknowledge two great listeners who've sent me information over the last week or so. Olivier de Mirlot is based in Switzerland. He's a very smart observer of American news and politics. And he sent me a link, and I'm putting it up in the show file for today's podcast. It is a documentary. It's a little over 2 hours long, and it was produced by Andrei Nekrasov. It's called The Magnitsky Act Behind the Scenes. And what Nekrasov did was originally he believed Bill Browder, the American-born billionaire, now a resident of Britain, who's at the center of promoting the story, what is exposed here as a false story, about his accountant or lawyer, and that becomes a critical detail because Browder calls him a lawyer, but everybody knew him as an accountant. And Magnitsky, according to Browder, exposed this fraud in Russia, but it appears the fraud was working in a very different direction. And the filmmaker, Nekrasov, he basically shows you the opening scenes from a documentary he was producing that supported Browder's narrative. And then he shows how he discovered that it was false, that key details simply didn't ring true, and that Browder wouldn't answer basic questions about what Magnitsky did, what he discovered. The film also suggests that Magnitsky was not tortured. He did die in prison, and it appears that the authorities knew he was sick and they didn't intervene. But at every turn, it exposes how the story of Magnitsky has been exaggerated or just, it's been done in a deceptive manner, and Bill Browder is at the center of it. So I encourage you to take a look if you have a chance. I found it a very persuasive documentary. Also, I want to thank Linda Lewis. She watched C-SPAN yesterday, and there was a coverage of a conference called the Free Speech Project. And the event was called Reporters, Sources, and National Security, and it was at Georgetown University. And Sanford Unger, a Georgetown, the leader of the Free Speech Project, a former journalist, was there. Marty Barron, executive editor of the Washington Post, Carrie Cordero, Georgetown law professor, Laura Poitras, Jamil Jaffer from the ACLU, formerly. And Marty Barron made a statement in response to a graduate student saying that this is kind of a golden age of journalism. Quote, I think people are inspired by some of the journalism they're seeing. They believe their government should be held accountable. They see that the press, the mainstream press, is doing a good job, in their view, of holding the government accountable. Well, then Mike Stone, who Linda Lewis thinks is a courageous guy, he's a reporter for Reuters. He politely said, the panel has talked a lot about the public interest, the national interest. It seems to me a lot of people believe the press has become so corporatized that real stories concern real people are not getting out or being diminished. We've gotten to the point that Jimmy Carter calls us not a democracy but an oligarchy. That's pretty serious stuff. It seems to me the press is largely responsible for that, for not telling the whole truth about a lot of things, being deferential to corporate interests, not reporting the full extent of these wars that we're involved with. And then Sanford Unger, Mr. Free Speech, he intervenes on behalf of Marty Barron to say this is a glory moment for the American media. Really? And then earlier in the program, Linda Lewis says, the moderator asked the panel, do we need some sort of protection in law for whistleblowers? And Cordero, the Georgetown law professor who used to work in Homeland Security, at the Justice Department for Obama, she said, well, the Espionage Act works. Quote, there have been a number of prosecutions for unauthorized disclosures that have been appropriately prosecuted using that framework. Now, fortunately, Laura Poitras and Jamil Jaffer disagreed with that view. But it is fascinating to see the self-congratulatory mode of corporate media editors these days. And boy, are they way out of touch with what I see from my perch here in California. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's free. You're free to share it far and wide, and you'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling